Well,
hiring leader and you're not leading anybody right now, imagine you're leading a team one day. But I want you to think about it on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being it's not important at all, and 10 being it's really, really important, you know, rate how important it is for you to be a better leader. And of course, look at this. I'm seeing 10, 10, 10. Now I'm going to hold these scores to you in just a little bit. I don't want, okay, don't want someone to see your score. I love it. Okay, have a look at the chat. Some great things. This is super important. Okay, so let's jump into this. We're going to talk about the intention impact gap. I want you to stay involved. I love when you guys are involved in the chat. So thank you. Stay active. I really like it. So we're going to get into, I want to start with a story. Okay, these are real stories. I'm going to change the people's names. There's part A, and then there's part B. Now, part A of the story is, and I'm going to get back to your scores later. Okay, so I'm going to come back to, you might be going, why did Steve ask us to rate those two things on a scale of 1 to 10? I'm going to come back to that, right? So I was facilitating a leadership conference in Australia. This was in the early 2000, mid 2000s. And I was approached by, I was doing leadership training in Newcastle, just a little town just outside of Sydney, Australia, working with a group of supervisors from all over the country. And I met a woman named, I'm going to call her Jenny. That's not a real name. She was amazing. She came up to me and said, I want to be the best leader ever. I love my team. She started to talk about how she has regular one-on-ones. She started talking about how much she cares and has regular team meetings. And she, every day she wants them to stay connected, to get to learn about each other. Her main intent, like her main goal, is to be the best leader that she could be for her team and for each of her members, right? She wanted to be as available as much as possible. She wanted them to ask questions, right? So I want you to imagine having a leader like this, everybody. Like, and the chat's already lit up. Imagine if you had a leader like this. Maybe you do. Maybe you had a leader like this. What impact did that have on you? Right? What impact does a leader that wants the best for you, that cares about you, that wants you to connect, has regular one-on-ones, creates an environment where you get to know your colleagues, right? It just sounded amazing. Like I see people empowering, right? So oh, awesome. Trust. I would give more to the company. Oh, Mona, I love it. So here's the thing. I was so inspired. I had lunch with her and said, like, tell me more, right? And we already know the impact. Yeah, look at this, beyond huge. You can see in the chat that people are talking about how they feel enthusiastic. We've done enough research at Brivia, and we love sharing it. We can't wait to share more as we go along with positive energy, right? Walking the walk, talking the talk, feeling focused and committed. We see a lot of people say going above and beyond, right? The impact of quality leadership is incredible. And we saw it. We saw 1 trillion, we saw 11 in the chat. It often leads to better outcomes, right? Better outcomes for us and better outcomes for the people that we're working with, right? So here's the cool thing about this. This story was so inspiring, it stayed with me forever. But it stayed with me for another reason. Because remember, I said there's 2 parts to this story. Let's go to part B. The only thing that's different between this slide and the last slide is a question mark. So what I love about my time in Australia is I go from town to town and I talk to leaders, I talk to employees, and I was doing a conference of about 200 employees from around the country in Sydney, Australia. And I was speaking at a conference on relationship-based strengths approach. That was one of the earliest approaches we developed, right? And I usually at lunch on these big conferences, there's people lining up to talk, and there was this woman standing in line for a really long time. We're going to call her Sarah. Sarah didn't look too happy. I was kind of concerned. I thought, like, maybe she's under the weather. Maybe she's tired. She looked like she was thinking lots while she was coming to me. And then she came up to me and said, I love the training, Steve. This is great. And I love to hear that. Never get tired of hearing that. And she said, I really like focusing on relationships and values and respect and being client centered. And I said, that's great. And she said, but there's this long pause. And she said, but what if you have a supervisor that doesn't operate in the same way? And I was like, oh, wow. Unfortunately, at that time, and still, this was not an uncommon thing to hear. And I said, well, just tell me a little bit more. And she went on and she's like, well, we have lots of time with our supervisor. We're actually all together, regular one-on-ones. We actually have tons of team meetings, right? She's an open door policy. And I was like, okay, Sarah, tell me more. And this was interesting. I was like, wow, this sounds familiar. And she said, but you know something, while we have a lot of time together, there isn't a lot of time to talk. There's not a lot of time to share. And this supervisor kind of talks over people, doesn't really give them an opportunity, and she basically takes up a lot of space and it's really hard. And I said, tell me a little bit more. And she goes, and as a matter of fact, she's always positive. she, you can never say anything negative and she gets upset, and you can't, we tried to give feedback, but she gets defensive and dismisses. I was like, wow, this sounds terrible. And I was kind of going, can you tell me what program you work in? And she goes, well, I don't work in Sydney. I work just outside of Sydney. I'm like, okay, all right. She said, well, this is the program I worked at. And I was like, okay. And I was like, I had this really weird feeling. And I asked her which program she worked in. And it was the one I was presenting at the day before with supervisors. And I leaned in and I said, can you tell me the name of your supervisor? And she said the name. And it was the woman I was having lunch with. I was honestly, it was like this big clap, this lightning bolt moment. I just was like, no, this has got to be wrong. I said, this has to be wrong. There was the gap that existed between, and this was wild, right? I was standing there, my head was reeling. I was a bit dizzy, to be honest, because I was sitting with this woman the day before, like taking notes and like celebrating. And then the next day, right? What are the chances of running into her, one of her employees in a group of 200 in another city? Well, our friend Dr. Kate Stone would say 1 because it happened. So there's this massive gap. And we know she went on to describe this. She went on to describe how she was feeling. And most of you can relate to this, hopefully not now. But she went on to describe that she was feeling disappointed and disillusioned. And her mood was like low, her energy was low. She was difficulty getting to work. It was affecting her performance. But here's the thing, this was what's absolutely wild. I spent a lot of time, I'm still in touch with this person from the mid 2000s, right? We had such a good conversation. She loves her work. She loves her clients. Sarah loved her team. Like, she loved being at this place, but she was looking for another job. Imagine having this experience. Has anyone had this experience? Has anyone had an experience where you felt you had a supervisor or a leader that spoke over you or was overly positive, or when you tried to give feedback was defensive or dismissive, right? It's terrible. We know the negative consequences, right? So we're going to get to this. It's huge. And we see in the chat, people have had this experience, right? Right. And here's what's wild. We're going to solve this problem today. Did you know that there is actually a solution to this one? Out of all the difficult problems we have with leadership and employee engagement and all that stuff. So this is the first time I experienced this phenomenon, which we refer to as the intent impact gap, right? It was so apparent. I thought it was a fluke. I thought it was like a unique circumstance. I was so blown away by this, because we know we have, like, here and there, we have negative experiences. We have blind spots. But this was so massive that it actually set me on a path to start investigating this and researching this. It was one of 3 lightning bolt moments. And what I learned over the years is that there's this thing called the intent impact gap, and it's real, and every leader has one. So we're going to take this seriously. And I think it's one of the reasons why this quote is in my top 10 favorite quotes of all time from Edward L. Flom. Right? The hardest task of leadership is understanding that you are, you're not what you are, but what you're perceived to be by others. I know I could just read the slide, but I'd rather just read it from my heart, right? And that is this speaks to the gap, right? This speaks to one of the toughest pills to swallow. And I know Steve's probably, I can see Steve's thinking over there. He's probably got a question for me. Steve, such a great stuff in the chat.
Yeah, no, Steve, this really is. And I think you set it up perfectly for us. So why don't we get into, you've done a great job setting this up. Why don't you explain a little bit more about what the intent to impact gap is?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. So let's just simplify it, right? The intent impact gap, and I can see in that, I just encourage people to check in on the chat. Like, there's so many really good things in there about people's experience of this, people acknowledging their own blind spots, right? Their own gaps. So simply put, thanks, Steve. It's a great question. The intent impact gap is exactly what it sounds like. It's the gap that exists between our intentions for our people. So what we want for them, what we hope, what we value, and the experience of them. But more in particular, their experience of us, our actions, our inactions, our interactions, all of our behaviors. How are they impacting them? And to be clear, the problem is not about intentions. And this is what I want to like, if anyone is feeling anxious right now or guilty or confused, I want to be clear that this is not about intentions. right? All leaders want success for their team. Every single leader wants to be successful with their team. The issue isn't in our assessment. I mean, the issue is in the assessment of this gap, or lack of assessment of this, tuning into it, right? And like I said, the solution that we're going to give you, the people that have used it have closed the gap 100% of the time. So I want you to get excited about the practical solution we're going to share today. Because what's interesting is, unfortunately, the problems with like disengagement, low motivation, poor performance, you name it, often the attention is put right on the employee, right? We focus on what's wrong with them, what's wrong, what's going on, but often what we need to do is in actuality, the focus should be on us, right? The concern should be with the leader first, and I'll explain that in just a bit. Okay, so that's the intent impact gap, Steve. I hope that was helpful.
No, that really was. And I know you kind of left a little nugget there. We are going to get to some solutions, but before we even get there, why don't we discuss, or why don't you share with us some things that leaders need to know about this gap?
Yeah, okay, for sure. Well, I mean, some important things that we need to know. So just to know for sure right off the bat that it exists. It exists for absolutely everybody, right? And when I started, I have to be honest, when I started doing research on leadership and I started to discover that this gap existed, sometimes it's small, sometimes it's large, I have to be honest, this is a bit of a confession. I was like, it's not me though. Right? I kept saying like, well, yeah, but not me. I'm interviewing all these leaders. They got not me though. And I wrote in the book about how I discovered in my first book on responsive leadership, how I actually figured out I had a massive gap. And I'll get to that in just a bit. So let's talk about this gap. As Steve, there's some really important things to know, and there's some really big truths, right? The big truth that we've learned, and it's a big part of our approach at Brivia, is no other variable in the world at work has a bigger impact on people than the experience of their leader or their direct leader, supervisor, manager, right? So that's really important, right? The other thing is that all leaders want good things. And I saw a couple comments in the chat earlier about, some people believe that there are not good leaders and stuff. And here's the thing that we've done. We've interviewed 11,000 leaders and asked them about what they wanted for their people. This is really important. 11,000. We stopped counting a couple of years ago. Every single leader said they wanted something good. They wanted their success. They wanted to know that they cared. They wanted to support, to nurture, to encourage, to guide. And here's the thing on that middle bullet here is what we've learned is that, according to research and some of our work, between 20 and 40% of those people that are on the receiving end of leaders who care will experience neutral to negative experiences. And this is the reality of the gap. But here's the other big one. We have tools. In the last 10 years, we've done more than 3,000, right? And that's a low number. I know at Brivia, we're now using what we call the core leader score. It's one of our assessment tools. It's one of the most accurate assessments of leadership as it relates to integrity, empathy, performance, support, right? So it's very dialed in. Right? I'll talk a little bit more about that, but what we found is we have a self-assessment component. So we have leaders in these tools, they do a self-assessment, and then their people assess them. I want to see in the chat, I want to ask you to take a guess, right? So out of 3,000, you got a leader doing a self-assessment, employees assessing the leader. How, in a percentage out of 100, how many times do you think they were exactly the same? So I want you to go into the, throw it in the chat. How many times do you think it ended up? Okay, say I see 0, I see 1%, I see 0% with loss, I see 10%, 30, Dana. Okay, Laura took a shot at, okay, there's some percentage in there. Well, guess the ones that said 0, you're absolutely right. Never, and I rarely use the word always and never, but never did they ever line up. Not once. And see, what we see is that 0%, right? Sometimes people over-evaluate themselves. Like they come in, they're higher, they're way higher than what their people rated. Other people are lower, but it's not just overall. Our scores just aren't like overall, like it's not a total. It's also very specific areas. So sometimes you can be over in your, you can be under what people think in terms of your supportiveness, but you can be over their score in terms of respect, right? So one of the things we like about the core leader score is it helps us determine, because this was the other question, we left it in. See, this is part of our philosophy. No offense, like this is just our perspective. Not that self-assessments are useless. Okay, so I want to be very clear. I'm not saying self-assessments are useless. but they're not nearly as helpful as the subjective experience of the people that are receiving your leadership. So at one point, I always said to my team, I remember this at Brivia, I'm like, let's just get rid of the self-assessment. Like, let's just kick it to the curb. But we kept it in. We kept it in. Do you know why we kept it in? Because it identifies the gap. It identifies where the gap is, but more importantly, how big it is. Now, it's a tough pill to swallow, right? We've worked with lots of people. We've worked with, but our tool is strengths-based. So if you see a big gap, you get buffered by knowing how great you are in certain areas, right? So this is how real it is, right?
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, Steve, this is real, right? If anyone doesn't think it's real, look at the data. It's real.
It's real.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like I when I think about me, Steve, going, oh, it's not me, it's not me. I think of how many leaders out there that were saying the same thing. And we're going to get to why this isn't simple. I know you got some good questions for me.
Yeah.
But you're absolutely right. Yeah.
Two questions, Steve. What do you do to help a leader take this seriously? And then also, what are some of the consequences when a leader reacts like this guy on the screen here and doesn't take it seriously? You want to walk us through those?
Yeah, well, here I'm coming back to everybody's scaling questions earlier, right? So why would Steve ask us how important we think the impact is of great leadership? Everybody did 10. Nobody, everyone did 10 or higher. Then I asked, how important is it for you to be a better leader? And it was all 10s. Why did I ask you that? Because when I have a conversation with you and you go, oh, it's not me, or it's not a big deal, I can go back to your trillion or your 11 or your 15 out of 10 and say it is, and I know you want to get better, so we have to take this seriously. That's why I did it, because it's meaningful for you and you already want to be a better leader. You already know that you have an impact on your people. But what happens though, Steve, this is it. The other thing I do, I don't like to be negative, but the potential of not taking this gap seriously is to lead to tons of misunderstandings, tons of communication breakdown and conflict. It's an opening for conflict. Many of the people that we intervene on high level conflicts and big situations, like big ones, right? And we often find when we investigate that it's due to a misunderstanding of the experience of the employee and the leader. Like we're talking 7 out of 10 times as a starting point. It can lead to poor engagement and a lack of motivation and undesirable performance when there's that gap. We've all been there, right? Maybe not to the same extent of Sarah and Jenny in Australia. It also leads to disillusionment, demoralization, and honestly, it is one of the fastest tracks to burnout, right? So we got to take it seriously.
Okay, well, thanks, Steve. Let's get into, I think we have kind of put this carrot out there a little bit so far. So let's go ahead and talk about the 3 ways a leader can zap the gap. And I just want to say before you do this too, folks, you don't have to take, you can take notes on this, but this is going to be the handout that we're going to give you tomorrow, a super helpful tool that you can, that Steve's going to walk you through.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, Steve. I'm looking at this slide right now, right? This person, we don't know if he's yelling or if he's being emphatic. I don't know, maybe he's trying to fly, right? But you can see his people are not having anything to do with it. But, often what happens is he may be telling himself a narrative about his team, right? They're lazy, they're not focused, whatever. And there's probably a gap. And the girl with the phone is probably texting somebody saying, I wish he knew what a jerk he was. So obviously there's a gap. Anyway, these are assumptions. And as Steve said, we must zap this gap. It is our mission as leaders to zap the potential of the carnage that lives in this gap. And this is how we're going to do it. We're going to get to 3 very specific things that you can do. And as Steve said, this is really, really important. We're giving you a handout. So I'm going to cover some very detailed things. We're going to give you a handout of what I'm talking about. Now, if you want to take some notes, great. I'm not going to stop you from doing that, but Steve will send you in a follow-up so you can go through this webinar again and you can fill out your own sheet, okay? So find some time. I'm going to give you 3 things that you can do. Number 1 is get clear on your intent. And what I mean by this is often we're told like how we should be as a leader or how you lead, or we went to that course. I saw people in the chat saying they went to courses. That's awesome. You sit down by yourself and you ask yourself 3 questions, okay? And I talked to a leader this morning, high-level leader in medicine, right? And we're talking, I go, what do you think you should do about this? And he answered so fast, and I went, wait, is that what you really want to do? And he goes, no, but I thought this is what I should do. Like, how often do we do this? I'm like, well, sit back, relax, connect with your intent. Because if you don't do this right, it won't work out. So I want to tell you that right now. So connect with your intent. What are you connecting on? There's 3 questions I want you to reflect on. Now we're going to give you this in the handout word for word. The first area you want to get clear on is, do I really care or value the employee, and do I want their success? That's the first area. Okay, so reflect on that. Do I really care? Now, the answer I'm hoping is yes. I do. Here comes the second message, the intent, right? And you've already answered this. Do I want to be a better leader for this person or this team? Yes. Okay, cool. Awesome. Yes. Go to the next question. So you're getting clear on these 3 intentions. And the final one is, do I want the best? Do I want the best possible working relationship with this team member? Okay. Because if the answer is maybe or no, I'm going to be honest here. We got time. We're going to have time for questions, right? All of that kind. I see some great things in the chat. Isn't their success my success? That's a great way of looking at it, right? So here's the thing. Number 1, do I care or value this person as a team member, as an employee? And do I want their success? So it's a 2-parter. Number 2 is, do I want to be a better leader or the best possible leader for this person? And number 3 is, do I want to have a better or the best possible working relationship? If the answer is yes to all of those 3 things, which I think it is based on what everybody shared so far in the chat, then you can move on to the next one. So get clear on your intent. Because it's true. I've talked to people that are like, I don't know, Steve, I'm not sure if I really value them as a team member. I'm like, hey, then we're not moving further. You got to decide, should they be on the team? Or how about this? I've said this a few times over the years. You may need to reconsider leading. If you connect with them, I'm not sure I want their success, or I'm not sure I really value them as a team member, because we're probably not doing them any service in our leadership. Okay. What's the second step? So we said we're going to give you 3, right? And I see Mike has put in the chat, start with better, right? Best is always shifting, right? Awesome. And I say best is an effort. Better is a destination, Mike, right? You can always get to better. Best, I'm not sure what that is. Okay, so number 2, share your intentions with your employee. Share your intentions with your team. Right now, I want you all to check how you feel about that, right? This is where it starts to get a little bit, okay. Share your reflections either as a team or in a group, and it goes, you've already done it, right? Find some time, right? And I'm gonna grab my notes here so that I can share them, and you're gonna get the handouts, you're gonna get the verbatim, but you want to find your own words, right? Feel free to use variations of this. Here goes. I wanted you to know that I care about you or value you. Okay, now you can choose those. Some people aren't comfortable with the care about you, right? But you can say, I value you as a team member and I want your success. That's how you share that first message. Now use your language. You can change it to make it your own, but you share that with them. And then you go right into the second message, which is, I want you to know, right? I want you to know, Dana, Lisa, Brenda, I want to be a better leader. I want to be a better leader for you. And then you go into the third statement. And the third statement is, I want you to know that I want to have the best possible working relationship with you. Okay. Now it's important to put working in front of relationship, right? Because you want to make sure you don't get a call from HR by saying that someone just left your office and you want to have a better relationship with them or the best possible. It's got to be working relationship. It's got to stay professional, right? And then you share your intentions. Okay, I'm checking my notes because I think it's important at that moment. You don't have to say anything. You don't have to add to it. If you have any questions, you can clarify your intentions and just be really clear with your team or with your individual team members, right? And I already see it in the chat. People are saying, "Oh, this seems vulnerable." That's why I asked you to check with your heart and your mind and your body. And we're going to talk about this. We're going to open it up to questions because I want to hear honestly what you think about what we're talking about here. Here comes number 3. So you've connected with your intention. You're now sharing your intention. And the third step is check in on their experience. Now you can do that in that moment, but for a lot of people, I'll tell you right now, for those who are feeling vulnerable, when I started doing this, I have to be honest, I was a bit scared. What if it backfires? What if they don't believe me? What if it paralyzed me? It paralyzed me so much I did nothing for about 2 years, even though I knew I should start having these conversations. And that was real, right? So you don't have to ask right away what they think about this. You can just say, I wanted you to know. I'm going to check in on you. And that's number 3, check in on their experience, right? In a follow-up on the floor, over an MS Teams or on Zoom or in person, you can circle back and say, hey, how am I doing on those 3 messages? How am I doing in terms of supporting your success, right? Do you feel valued as a team member on the team, right? Yes, maybe, or no. And is there anything I can do? And this is where you can take feedback or input differently or better. And then you go to the second message, right? How am I doing as a leader? I wanted to be a better leader. Do you have any input for me? Is there anything that I can do, change, or make better? And then you move to the third message. How are we doing? How are we doing in terms of our working relationship? Can it be better? Is there anything I can do or think about to consider getting better in terms of our relationship? Okay. Now, I would love to hear what people are thinking about this, because this is usually where we have a great amount of discussion. And I see there's tons of comments in the chat. And this is what's really important. I want to give you a couple of tips. And Steve, we should open it up soon, because I know there's lots of questions on this, right?
Yeah. So there's been a lot of, sorry, Steve, there's been a lot of questions coming in, folks. Keep them coming. We're going to have time to get to as many as we can. And Steve, I'll let you finish your thought here.
Yeah, and this is one of those areas, and I'm glad that I saw the word vulnerability in the chat quite a bit, because this is it. I mean, it's not easy to talk openly about being better and demonstrating vulnerability and learning about where we might not be doing it well. I'll talk a little bit about that in just a minute. But one of the things, if you're not hearing positive feedback, right? I would be concerned if you're only hearing positive feedback from your team. If you're doing a good job, it's amazing, you're the best, it's always good. Because it's impossible to be doing everything the best. So I would just be cautious about that. And I'll give you a tip on saying, is there one thing I can do differently, right? And if they're still not giving any feedback, you can say, is there any behaviors that you prefer that they can throw in there? Gives them an opening, just not to say you're not doing it, but hey, here's a couple of things that I'd prefer, or my old boss did, right? Keep it safe. So this is one of the things that we're talking about, is that number 1, 2, and 3 messages. You're going to get a handout so that you can follow this step by step. But what we're trying to do here, and we can open it up, Steve, to questions right away, is we're just trying to close that gap. That's all we're trying to do. We can never close it. I think we're never done as leaders. I think this is really important for me to clarify and reinforce. Even me, who has spent the last 21 years developing leadership and taking feedback, I know that every day, even in spite of my intentions, I might offend somebody. I might rub them the wrong way. I might use the wrong word. And if we don't create the conditions and create the conditions where they feel safe, significant, and situated, and we're going to talk about that in another webinar, I wanted to say we also, not only the core leader score do we have, but one of the greatest things that we've created is called core communication. And one of the things is we assume that people have these human skills to be able to have these conversations, but many of us don't. So we love to help. You can reach out. But anyway, I want to get to the questions. Okay. Let's get to the questions, Steve. I want to hear what people are saying, and I want to get to some questions, right?
Sure. Yeah. Well, let's get to them, Steve. There's been quite a few that have come in, and folks, I'm going to try and read your comments as well. But if you have a question, just put it in the form of a question, Q&A, or chat. We'll get to it. So,
yeah,
Steve, what if everyone agrees that someone is a good leader, but the employee is victimizing themselves? Have you ever dealt with this?
Oh, wow. And the employee is victimizing themselves. So the leader is a good leader and the employee is victim. Well, I would say that that's a gap in and of itself, right? Just because if there's a difference of experience or a difference of opinion, that's a gap. Now, then we move into, well, why is that happening? We got to be very cautious. What do we know about this gap or this difference in perspectives from the leader's perspective, but more importantly, from the employee's perspective? I'd be curious to know what victimization means. That's a pretty packed word. So I'd need to, maybe if someone could send a private chat to the moderators or maybe explain that a little bit more. Because victimization is a pretty big word with some very specific meanings, right? So I'd like to hear a little bit more about that. I think if we dialed it down to the employee was experiencing feeling suppressed or oppressed or talked over or disvalued, then we get into more specifics. And I think what's really, really important here, and it's a tough pill to swallow for us leaders, is that we need to understand the employee's experience if we're going to be able to do anything about this conflict, right? So it's critical that we can't leave a place unless we first arrive. And arriving is, what is it that they really need? What do they value? What is their experience? And how can we get access it in a way that informs us to modify one or two things of our behavior and the way that we interact? Okay. I'm not sure if that was helpful, Steve, but that's what comes to my
Yeah.
head and my heart. Yeah.
Okay, well, a little clarification came in on that, so you might want to
Nice.
iterate or go off on this. So victimizing
Okay.
themselves, like saying you're not being a good leader to me and not giving me enough attention. And their understanding of attention is 24/7 attention, right?
Oh, okay.
So,
All right. So I see Mona, thank you. I just opened up the chat there. So this is great. This is awesome because this is where the rubber hits the road, right? So Mona, first of all, in those situations, because you might be talking about a friend, right? Or an employee member, is that so I see 24/7. Now, what's interesting is if somebody thinks that you're asking for 24/7, you can clarify that and say, right? And this is one of those things. If you're an employee on a receiving end where a leader asks you, what do you need? This is important. So this isn't in the handout, but it's important for you to do that first step too. And connect with, what do I need? There's three things that we ask employees to connect with. Number one is, what do you need? Like, what do you need from your leader, from your supervisor? What do you value, right? In terms of what's important to you. And what are you hoping for? And be as specific as possible. Because I agree, I don't think it's 24/7, Mona, right? But what is it that you are hoping for in terms of supervision or support or guidance, right? And try to get as specific on that and share that with them and let them decide whether that's possible or not. That's where I would start. Thank you so much for the questions.
okay, Steve, we got a couple of specific questions on the three steps. So let me give them to you together and then you can unpack these. These steps take vulnerability. How
Yep.
can we manage pushback? And another
Okay.
question was, how can we manage these three steps with employees who stonewall us? They don't buy into this approach.
Okay. Well, those are really good questions. So we have the $1 billion question video on our YouTube channel, right? Stonewalling and resistance is very interesting because think about what I'm going to ask you to do, folks. Everybody here is think about when you were reluctant or you were apprehensive. Okay. This is really, really important. Okay. One of the reasons most of us, and you can put it in the chat, I love seeing the chat, such great things. Think about when you were, I try to not say stonewalling, but what stonewalling is, where we feel resistance or opposition, right? So here's the interesting thing. Think about the last time you were apprehensive to open up and share when someone asked you. And I'm going to guess it was one of two things, okay? And you can correct me in the chat or participate. Is one, you didn't trust the person or trust what they were saying. Or two, you didn't really believe it, right? And this is important because often when people are resistive or apprehensive or reluctant, it's often because it's in the it doesn't really matter. They're close to the it doesn't really matter moment, right? So there's only one antidote to that, is to demonstrate that we're serious and keep coming back. Let them know, right? Do not push back on people that are pushing back because you're going to evoke more resistance. You want to do it. We talked about it in the values and the apology webinars, that you want to approach first with care and then with curiosity, right? Which is, I really mean these messages. And if you do, this is the good news. I worked with gang members who were hard to get to. I've worked with some of the most difficult employees on the planet, and also some very violent individuals. And all three of those people changed their behavior once they trusted me and believed that what I was saying was true. So that's the first part. The second part is, keep at it, because you're not the first leader on the tour. And I want everybody here to know this. Everyone's human. Like Tina or Jeff, it's nice to see you here, everybody. Cindy, right? We've had leaders before. We're human. We've been burnt, bent, broken, and bruised when somebody has said, tell me what you really need. Tell me what you really want. And I want to be better for you. And then not only did it not happen, but the opposite happened, right? And that's one of the things. And there's some great things in the chat. Be authentic, be empathic. And this is one of the reasons, everyone, and thanks for the questions, is why I get leaders and everyone to sit in their own intent first before you venture out with these messages and do step 2 and step 3. Is you've got to be sure, because I'll tell you something. This is what I really believe. I believe in you as a human. I believe in you as a good leader. And if you connect with those messages and you continue to say, I'm here, my door's open and I want to be a better leader. And that one moment, this is it. We got to be very careful, because say Mike takes the risk, or Brenda takes the risk for the first time to say, I'm believing Steve. I'm getting there. He's been consistent for 3 months. He's different from other leaders. And someone says, okay, I've got something. I'm just wondering if, we can have meetings less, not every day, but maybe every second day. And I go, listen, those meetings are important. So we need to have them every day because it's a mandate sent by the region. Oh, right. That could have been my moment. And that's why we talk about being open to what people have to say. And if they ask for something, here's another thing. And Steve, do you have another question ready?
I do, yeah.
Okay, because I want to give this other tip. Is that if you take the risk and you ask somebody what they need from you, what they want, what's important to them as as an employee, and they tell you something that's impossible, like I want another supervisor, take a deep breath and try this question. How would that be helpful? What difference would it make for you if you had a different supervisor? And you might be surprised that if you can get through that moment, they'll say something like, it's not that I want another supervisor, I just want to feel like I'm valued. And there you go, there's part of it. Tell me about that. Okay. Okay, Steve. Thank you for the questions. Yeah, great questions.
Okay, another great one just came in. I completely understand the trust factor. However, sometimes staff come in with significant trauma. As an employer, it will be difficult to build trust when there is significant trauma and adverse childhood experience as a reality when they walk through the front door. Any thoughts on that, Steve?
Yeah, tons of thoughts. Thank you for the question. We went 10 years ago from trying to listen better to now, in this day and age, doing trauma-informed leadership. Like we're moving really fast, right? And these skills, and it's real. So when we talking about people coming in with post-trauma or childhood trauma, what's really important to keep in mind is we are running a business. We are running a health service. We got to get back in the context. And when we hire them, we need a certain amount of performance to take care of the people we're responsible for. So we can't lose sight of that, because sometimes we do, and the job site becomes a counseling center, and that's, even though that's good, that's not what we're there to do. So we have to find that balance between authenticity, caring, nurturing, encouraging, and the clarity to get the job done. So we just have to be open and mindful. To what extent is this affecting the work? Is it impacting the work? Because sometimes we use trauma-informed lens and everyone has been traumatized, and that's not the case, right? It's a person by person approach, right? What do they need? What's important to them? And when they are not performing, or they're not functioning in the way that we are hoping for, that we expect, and that we prefer, then we move in with curiosity, concern, and care, and say, tell me about that. What's going on for you? What do you need? And how can I support you as a leader? Okay, so I said to a high-level leader in the military the other day that we should just approach all direct reports like they're scared of us. And he said, well, that's funny. Why would you do that? And I go, well, whenever we believe someone's afraid of us, we slow down, we make it clear, we articulate, we repeat, we ensure that they're clear. I'm like, wow, that works for humans. So with the trauma-informed lens, I said it's really important. We have to understand that everybody that comes to us has had an experience, and with the way the world is going now, right? We're going into constant disruption where people are having emotional, social, even cultural trauma, spiritual trauma that we've got to make some space for. And that doesn't mean that we turn into therapists, but that we create conditions where they can feel safe, significant, and situated, so that they can put their efforts and their commitment into what matters while they're at work. Okay, great question.
All right. Well, thank you, Steve. We're going to get some more questions, but folks, I wanted to tell you it's 10:04, or it's 43 after. We said 45 minutes. If you need to drop off, we understand. We will send you through the follow-up as well as information on our next webinar next week. But Steve and I decided we'll stay on and answer a few more questions here. So, yeah. Steve, another question came through. Someone's asked this question, and the answer is they want a new supervisor who can help them grow. They want someone who lets do things the way they think they should do, right? Not the way the leader thinks it, but the way the person who they're leading. So how do you react to that? Do you let it be and let the work be affected, or what would be your coaching tip for that?
Yeah, well, we've got to respond to it. So we got to remember that the employee is being asked and invited in to do a specific function in a specific way. So we've got to be very careful that, if I'm new to the job, I know an accountant at Netflix, a really good friend of mine, and she says, once my employees can do it the way we expect it, then I let them create their own way, right? And I'm, oh, that's pretty cool. But we've got to be very cautious that, is this a stylistic difference? Like, are we being expected to perform in a certain way to get a certain task done? Now, if that's the case, if we disagree with it, we've got to recheck, is this the job that we want? And is this the role that we want? Now, however, if there's flexibility, then, is this a style or a personality issue, right? Because I don't think there's anything wrong with an employee saying, I want to grow, I want to be successful, I want to be better. But if it's outside the function and the role or the expectations of their job, then we've got to be cautious that maybe they need to be looking at another function, another role, another department, or even, an environment where they're able to grow. Because wanting an employee's success may not necessarily being successful here, but maybe it's about wanting them to be successful somewhere else. That's just as legitimate.
Okay, well, that's good. Folks, we'll take a few more questions. Steve, there's one that's going to go take us back to the beginning of the presentation here. When you talked about the high scores that indicated that leadership, was so universal, right? The desire to be led well and to lead well. Do you think this correlates at all to a thirst to follow anyone who's a strong leader? The dangers maybe of following a leader who leads us down the wrong path. Just kind of your thoughts on that, I guess.
Yeah, and great chats. People read the chat. There's some good discussions going on in there. I think, getting led down the wrong path. I mean, that to me, just that idea is just scary. Like, what is the wrong path, and how far are we going down it before we know we're on the wrong path? I think this is one of the things, and we can kind of wrap it up close to here, Steve, is I think, because I know people have things to get to, and we're gonna, you'll tell them where they can get the recording. If we follow a leader that aligns their values with the company values, the team values, that aligns their behavior with those three messages that we've talked about earlier, that they align with the mission and vision of the organization or the department, we're not going down the wrong path, right? I think when we have a lack of connection and a lack of clarity, right, where it compromises our confidence, we're vulnerable and we're in danger, right? Where are we going? Why are we going? How are we going? With who are we going? But this is why it's so important. We're talking about work. Let's get back to work. That's why organizations should, and I don't use that word very often, have a clear mission, have a clear vision. More importantly, have a clear set of values that identifies and clarifies how should we behave? Where are we going? How do we treat each other? Not only under positive circumstances, but when we have disagreements. What is our strategy and how is it informing us? And if those things if we're connected and clear on those things, we're not getting misled, we're not getting manipulated, we're going down the right path. But we've got to be cautious when we don't feel connected, when we don't feel clear and we're not feeling confident. That's when we stop and check it out and ask the questions. Where are we going? How are we going and why are we getting there? And it's up to your leader to provide you the most connection and clarity, and subsequently the greatest confidence possible, so that you're at least going in the right direction or the general direction you need to be. So I'm going to leave it at that.
All right. Well, Steve, I'm going to wrap up, but maybe before I do you want to share a few closing thoughts with us?
Yeah, well, first of all, I want to say thanks for those who stayed and hung in, such a big number of people today, and thank you. But I'm just going to make it very simple. I like it simple. The intent impact gap is real, so give it attention. Number one, just give it the attention it deserves, and embrace it and give it attention. After you give it attention, make an intention, which means get intentional. The gap does not close on its own. As a matter of fact, no news is not good news unless you're waiting for a call from the physician, but make an intention. I'm going to get intentional about closing this gap, and I'm going to do something about it. And then finally, work for retention. Now, I like rhymes. I like threes. So attention, intention, retention. What are we retaining? We are retaining the right behaviors, the right feedback, and the right people. So that's what we're going to do. Thanks for being here. I'm going to kick it back to you, Steve. Tell everybody what can they get and expect.
Yes. All right. Well, that wraps up the webinar, folks. We so appreciate the active discussion today. We want to keep that going. So first of all, if you want to keep this attention or keep the conversation going, reach out on LinkedIn, send us an email, contact@briviaconsulting.com. Follow us on LinkedIn, get our newsletter. We would love to keep that going. The recording of the webinar is going to be sent tomorrow, along with a handout that is going to be able to walk you through those 3 steps. So make sure you look for that. We are also going to have another webinar. We're going to make it number 28 in November, Steve. We're going to talk about engagement in November. So let us send you some of that information on that. That'll be exactly 4 weeks from today where we're going to have that. And yeah, we just want to thank you for your time. It's the most important gift you can give us, and we hope you have gotten as much out of this today as we have. So thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Steve.